Okie doke. And all right. Good evening and welcome to tonight's panel discussion, Growing Resilience, Farmers Respond to Climate Change, with farmers from 3 Waldo County Farms, Bahner Farm, Daisy Chain Farm, and Dickey Hill Farm. I'm Brenda Harrington, Program Librarian at the Belfast Free Library. Thank you all for joining us. This program is being recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube channel. Before we get to tonight's panel discussion, I'd like to mention that this program is part of the All of Belfast Climate Dialogues, or ABCD, a project of the Belfast Free Library, which we created to help residents in our area talk about climate change and its impacts in order to increase awareness and help us all prepare for the challenges ahead. As part of the ABCD project, and because we cannot meet in person, we are seeding conversations by hosting programs like this, as well as building a collection of climate change stories and observations on our website. I invite you to go to our website, belfastlibrary.org, and follow the link to the All of Belfast Climate Dialogues to learn how to participate. Our panel of farmers are here tonight to tell us their stories and discuss how the effects of climate change, including droughts, floods, pests, and extreme weather events, have challenged and changed their farming practices, and answer your questions. To get started, I will call on each farm to introduce themselves and their farm. I will go in alphabetical order. After the introductions, I will be joined by my colleague from the ABCD project, Sarah Kern, who will moderate the panel discussion and the Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them during that time. Okay, so first up is Bahner Farm. Located on Route 3 in Belmont, Maine, many of you may be familiar with and have visited their busy and full service farm stand filled with their MOFGA certified mixed vegetables and much more. Mike Bahner is here tonight to introduce himself and his farm. Okay, Mike.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. We are a diversified vegetable farm. We grow about 6 acres of field crops, and then we have about 10,000 square feet of high tunnel space that we're growing year round in. We also have a heated greenhouse.
Maybe it's my speaker.
And we grow seedlings as well. And
is it my speaker?
Hold on, sorry. Please mute, I'm sorry, Mike. Please
That's
keep yourselves muted, folks. Go ahead, Mike.
We sell at our farm stand here on the farm. We do one farmer's market in the summertime in Bar Harbor, and then we do some wholesale as well, primarily through the Daybreak Growers Alliance. And most of that wholesale is in the wintertime. My wife, Krista, and I run the farm and have 2 wonderful kids, Lizzie and Nikki.
All right, thank you, Mike. Next, we have Daisy Chain Farm from Belfast, Maine. MOFGA certified growers of strawberries, raspberries, apples, and pumpkins, primarily for you pick. A multi-generational family farm. Tonight, Daisy Beal is with us to introduce herself and their farm. Daisy.
All right. Hi, folks. I'm going to try to share a few pictures with you. Okay. So our farm is in Belfast on the Tufts Road, and we share the place with my husband, our 2 kids, and his parents, Jean and John, and his aunt, Sally. So it is an extended family farm situation. Let's see. Here are some of our main crops. We're best known for our you-pick strawberries and raspberries. We also grow apples, fresh eating, and for hard cider. And the kids have a you-pick pumpkin project. So we often sell the apples bagged. We're starting to do that at the same time that the you-pick pumpkins are available. And then after we're closed up on the farm in the fall, we've been selling apples through the Bahners. So that's our wholesale. And also the kids sold pie pumpkins through the Bahners this fall. Here's some sort of climate-y related pictures. This is Sally, my husband's aunt, working on the compost pad. We use local waste materials like horse bedding and seafood waste to make compost. And here are a couple other things we've got going on. So this is just a cover crop on the right that's nice and tall, mixed cover crop. And on the left is a new pollinator planting that we put in. So these are all perennial native blooming things that spread out resources for insects throughout the growing season. And this is a picture of our solar panels on the farm that cover our electricity and power 2 of our cars. And on the left is a bridge with my daughter for scale. This is a bridge that we lost this year due to flooding on Halloween night. And this is a picture of winter because we love winter and we want it to stay around. Okay, that's it for us.
Thank you. All right, so whoops, I gotta find my, thank you, Daisy. Dickey Hill Farm is a small diversified farm in Monroe, Maine that grows an acre of MOFGA certified organic vegetables, including several unheated high tunnels for year-round harvest. Dickey Hill Farm is owned and operated by Nomi Brodegam and James Gagne. And here to introduce their farm tonight is Nomi Brodegam. Nomi, you may take the mic.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for coming for the conversation. My name is Nomi and I use she, her pronouns, and I farm with my partner James in Monroe. And as Brenda said, we grow MOFGA certified organic vegetables and seedlings, and we also have a small beef herd that we rotationally graze through our pastures. We're a pretty small scale farm. We have less than an acre of vegetable production and then 4 unheated high tunnels for winter greens production. And we attend 2 farmers markets. We attend the Belfast Farmers Market on Fridays year round and the Rockland Farmers Market May through October. And that's primarily where all our food is sold. And yeah, through the summer season, we at this point hire 2 additional employees for labor support. And yeah, I'll look forward to sharing our experience as the night continues.
Great, thank you, Nomi. So now I'd like to turn this over to my colleague. I'd like to introduce and turn this over to my colleague and one of the driving forces, I would say, behind the All of Belfast Climate Dialogues project, Sarah Kern, to moderate the panel discussion part. So Sarah,
Thank you,
I will
Brenda.
spotlight all of you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you all. And it's great to have you here. And it's fun to hear about your farms. And this conversation we're having tonight is really focused on resilience. And I heard by your descriptions of your farms and the different enterprises that you have going, it sounds like you have resilience built into your business models. Can you talk a little bit about how you decided what to grow, what combination of things, and the combination of places where you sell that helps you make ends meet as farmers and be successful? Daisy, will pick on you because you just coughed.
No, inhaled my feet.
Oh, sorry.
So I saw, as far as picking enterprises, when I lived in Burlington, Vermont, there was a U-pick berry farm, Adams Berry Farm. It's no longer in Vermont, it's bigger now, but that was an inspiring model, especially near town, being close to town, and having the customers come to the farm as sort of a lifestyle and a financial choice. Also, I read a book called Cooked by Michael Pollan, that talked about trends about people cooking less and less. I don't think that applies in Belfast as much as in other places, but the idea of selling something that is a snack and you can eat with one hand seems to make sense. But also I was interested as a grower in growing perennials because I thought I needed a good lifelong challenge. I don't know, I was a little bit crazy, but because you can't rotate an orchard or a raspberry plant, I mean, you know, and then strawberries are even a shorter term, but in that order, you have to do other things. And it seemed like a place in the market that wasn't being met. It's still, it's really much harder to find organic fruit, especially locally grown or even regionally grown, rather than vegetables. And I think the lack of being able to rotate as much is part of that issue. So some people would go so far as to say that it's impossible to grow apples organically and be financially viable. I don't have an answer to that yet. We'll see how it goes longer term. But so I thought this is a place in the market that's not being served, and something that'll be interesting. And I really love fruit. That's me.
Excellent. Naomi, how about you?
Let's see, we moved up to the farms about 7 years ago, and my background is working for other farms growing vegetables, but we were kind of feeling out where some gaps may be and like what we could offer the community without stepping on other farms' toes right away. And between that and kind of our space limitations, we don't have a huge piece of property, and it's fairly hilly. So we focused in on winter greens production. I guess the other piece of that is that there's quite a bit of federal funding available for high tunnels, which being a beginning farmer was super helpful. So 3 of our 4 tunnels were grant funded. And then the beef herd, we kind of just inherited cows when we moved here and did not have experience with that, but it made a lot of sense with the property, and we started composting the manure and integrating it into our farm system. And so we've kept up with that.
Great. Mike?
Yeah, we most of our experience was working on vegetable farms that marketed at farmers markets and some wholesale. And we had sort of initially when we set out, we had like 2 different generic business plan ideas. One, finding a farm close to markets. The other, finding a farm, basically a wholesale farm. You know, if we found farmland in Piscataquis or Aroostook County or Penobscot County, something like that. And we found a farm close to markets with, on-farm marketing potential. And so that, dictated to a large extent where we went with marketing. We used to do 3 farmers markets a week, and we brought that down to 1. And the farm stand has, we've been doing that since 2000, and we built it in 2012. So the farm stand's coming up on 10 years, and we've just been building that business. The winter thing, was a little bit of a, we eased into that, I think. And then once we really got it in our heads that we wanted to not work off the farm in the wintertime, then it was a no-brainer. We're going to get into winter greens. We're going to pick a couple of things that we like to grow for storage crops, and we'll market in the wintertime. And we did our buying club. We started it as a CSA model and switched it to a buying club model. And that's been great. And we've built that up, as well. And the past couple of years, I mean, we were just very lucky to have two pretty pandemic resilient business models, so they've been great decisions for us. And wholesale has just sort of happened, I think, mostly because of the startup of Daybreak Growers Alliance, and just being linked in with that organization has opened up new marketing outlets on the wholesale side for us.
Good. It's clear in all of your answers, as different as they are, that as farmers, you're really sitting in this space between what do you want to grow and what's the physical farm look like and what can you grow there, but also really being responsive and aware of market forces and the system and the community of other farmers. So thinking about that and thinking about climate change, how have you noticed ways that your customer base is changing or their preferences are changing as a result of growing awareness of climate change or their own awareness of climate change? Has that shifted? We're obviously going to talk a lot about the growing as well. And Nomi, your smile is biggest, so I'm going to pick on you.
I guess the first thing that I thought of is that I do have more customers asking about our rotational grazing practices and like if our beef is grass fed. And I think there is more public awareness around like different animal practices and potential impacts on climate. So I guess that's the first thing that came to mind. I'm not sure as much with the vegetables. I'm curious what Mike has to say about that.
Yeah, I think mostly I feel like customers have gotten curious about growing practices because we make the compost like 300 feet from the farm stand, so there's an aroma occasionally, and then it starts conversations, and they can see the piles, and we produce about 250 yards of finished compost every year, and that is one of the most common conversations, talking about fertility, resilience, and soil building, is huge and gets us going, talking about, trying to reduce animal manure inputs, from off farm, and relying mostly on, cover crops and compost. So yeah, I mean, that's been good. We get a lot of people on sort of, asking about all the greenhouses and what's being grown in there. And because we also sell a lot of seedlings, we have a lot of conversations about home gardening. And so that has everything to do with climate change and everything to do with what we're going to talk about tonight, which is people are having all kinds of challenges and successes home gardening in a time of climate change.
Yeah, what you're all facing, but on a smaller scale. Daisy, do you want to comment about that position between the market and the growing before we follow on that thread that Mike just brought up?
Sure. I would say it's not so much, I haven't seen a preferences change, but definitely plenty of conversations about what's going on. And in a good year, I'm often explaining why the strawberries taste so good. And in a year when we're dealing with moldy berries and I'm like paying somebody to pick moldy berries off ahead of the other, customers, then we're kind of explaining that too, that when things are, wet and damp, we have mold. When there's a late frost, which is really the most climate change affected thing, when there's late frost, we lose yield. And when we have a, you know, a magically perfect for strawberries spring, like we did this year, where it was warm and dry and we didn't have any late frosts, then we get a really killer crop, and they're all, you know, they have great concentrated flavor because they barely got enough water because we had to irrigate them, you know, with everything we got, but that was barely enough. And so yeah, it affects our crop for sure. And so we end up talking about it. And I think because there are so many gardeners in our community as well, people do bring their own experiences and ask, you know, my raspberries didn't do anything this year, did yours? And that kind of thing.
Yeah, isn't that you mentioned the late frost idea? That's at the first blush, it looks like that doesn't make sense. Isn't climate change about the climate getting warmer? Why are we having late frost? But it's a great example of the kind of disrupted nature that the climate has, more than a nice clean shift to something warmer. It's just a little bit more chaotic. So how have those chaotic shifts in climate shown up in your farming, and what are some of the things that you're doing? And maybe, because that's a monstrous question, it's huge. Maybe we can let's start with the vegetables, and then maybe we can go to some of the other crops. So yeah, in a nutshell, what are the things that have been most disruptive maybe to your growing operations, climate related?
Who wants to go?
No, it's an awful question, but we had to go there.
I'll start.
Okay,
Thanks.
thanks.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's pretty fresh in my mind, like the winter harvested greens, when we have really mild weather in the fall, it's really difficult to have to hold those greens, especially things that are pretty fast growing. So we've had to, you know, this year we were harvesting like crazy all through November and into December. And we're, you know, usually the lead up to Christmas, you know, we're trying to have quite a bit for those sales. And I mean, stuff, you know, we had harvested it earlier than we had expected. It had grown way more than we had expected it to. And it was regrowing, but not like to a point where we could harvest it. You know, stuff like that, you know, it's very hard to, it's hard to say, oh, well, we need to just shift our planting dates. Because then with the instability, we could have a fall that's really cool, you know, or cold. And you know, we shift a planting date, and then all of a sudden the greens are, you know, 2 weeks behind, and it got so cold that, you know, they're taking a really long time to size up. So you have to kind of shoot for the middle, you know, a nice solid line through that fluctuating wave pattern that is climate change. I mean, it's climate instability. You know, it's like, recently I've been thinking about like a weightlifter who's like lifting this like really heavy weight, and you're like shaking violently before you drop it. And that's what I'm really like. I mean, it's kind of a doom and gloom mindset when I think about it, but you know, it's just all the fluctuations, you know, they scare me, because it means there's weakness in the system that we've had for eons, and things are changing, and we don't know what it's going to be like on the other end. And we seem to have these mild falls now, and I guess we just need to be better at planning for that, maybe. Anyway, that's one of the, you know, the ways in which we're sort of battling with the weather and the climate is, you know, that fall planting, growing the winter harvested greens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that same challenge that Mike is talking about. And then just like what he's alluded to, bigger picture, just like the lack of ability to plan for any scenario. feels quite challenging. And just that feeling of like, you just never really know. And I would say like along the winter greens line a few years ago, and I think this is going to be happening more, where we got a bunch of midwinter like torrential rains
Mhm.
where the rain has nowhere to go because the ground's frozen, and all of a sudden there's just like all this rain funneling over the ice into our high tunnels, and it's just like, oh well, I couldn't have anticipated that happening. Like just kind of knowing that there will be that type of scenario like every couple of months, probably, it feels like. This past spring, when it was so hot in the beginning of June, we grow early high tunnel snap peas in some of our covered space, and this was the first season that the actual tops of the plants like cooked. They just like turned brown and died. And it's like, not only do we lose production and yield, and like that's obviously a financial impact, but then also trying to manage staff and like employee health and how we're going to get staff in there to harvest them when it's so hot, and kind of just like realizing that the extreme weather is also bringing like a whole slew of like management and human health conversations, and kind of like puzzles to figure out.
Yeah.
I could go on about like a
Well,
million. There are
and we
some
will. That's
examples.
what the that's what the conversation is about. How about you, Daisy? Do you have a first response?
Sure. I think one of the first things I did, so based on past climate in Belfast and sort of our growing zone, I planted 3 varieties of raspberries when we first put in our raspberries, and like an early, middle, and a late. 2 of those 3 varieties I've ripped out already because they were not hardy enough. And that's the funny thing. They were so they were bred more for the Pacific Northwest, but supposedly hardy enough for here. And after my experience losing production on them, I decided I only want to buy varieties that are bred in Nova Scotia. And it's funny because, again, the warming climate, but an unstable climate means instead of gradually coming into fall, you can crash into winter rather gradually, and so it's hard for plants to gain hardiness. And on the other end, when you have an early warming spring, but then it cools off again and gets freezing, plants change their biochemistry. When it gets warm, they lose their like antifreeze in their cells. And then when it frosts again, or rather freezes again, the cells burst. And so I can go through all the work of pruning and trellising those raspberries and get them all ready. And they still even look green on the inside when I cut them. But then when things properly warm up and spring arrives, they don't leaf out. The buds are just dead. So the cane is either partially dead or sometimes even dead all the way down towards the ground. And so I can't go through that again. And so I've just taken out the varieties. Last year, I couldn't even replant because the pandemic had so many people buying all kinds of food producing plants that they weren't available. But so that's a dramatic example. But the more common issue is frosts in the spring on the strawberries. So if it warms up early, but then the frosts are still closer to their historical dates, which is the sort of the trend that we've been seeing and is predicted, that can catch strawberry blossoms off guard, and they're very frost tender. So a challenge for me is knowing when to rake the straw off the strawberries and get them started. The more you wait, the lower your yield, but the earlier you go, the more frost risk you have, and the more days you have to spend. In our case, because we're small, we use row covers, so putting row covers on and off and on and off. So again, it's a tough balance prediction wise, and it's one reason why, things like that are reasons why people are going more and more towards protected culture, growing things under high tunnels. And we're not there yet. Part of we like the aesthetics of like an outdoor farm, and especially as a UFIC operation. And of course, high tunnels are expensive, and they take maintenance, etc. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
where we are right now.
And are terrifying during all the windstorms.
Right. And the more you have severe windstorms, the more you're up late at night. Yeah. Freaking out about your things blowing away.
We discovered the second like beauty of our toddler's white noise machine at night is that we sleep better at night in windstorms. Unless the power goes out, and then we're all very awake.
I have a friend who had made a joke one time that said if the the CIA would have a really good time torturing farmers by just playing the sound of whapping plastic in a windstorm on loop over and over again. You get any information you wanted, false or true, it doesn't matter, out of a farmer, because just make it stop.
The same would work for a sailor too.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot about climate change. I'm working on this project with Brenda and the town of Belfast and the city of Belfast. And I thought I had a pretty good handle on the changes that you all are facing. And I'm kind of dumbstruck by the complexity that you're facing. And it's not just climate, but it's market forces and all of the rest. And one of my questions to you, and this will be my last question, and then I promise I will turn to audience questions. But I wanted you all to have a chance to say what you want your customers to appreciate about what you're facing and what you're doing and what goes into creating the products that you sell to them. And your previous round of answers, I think, is great because it shares with all of us just what you're up against. And of course your prices are high, and I'm hell-bent to support you now because I have a better appreciation of what you're facing. But are there other things that you wish customers appreciated? And Mike, you also have me thinking, we should reschedule all of our big holidays, not around a calendar, but around the weather and when things are available, instead of trying to force things to be ready when we want them, because that's, it's backwards. But anyway, anything you'd like your customers to appreciate about what you're dealing with these days?
I can jump in. I would say one thing that we're privileged to be able to do because we own land and because we're a farm is work with the NRCS, which is part of the USDA, so a government funded organization that helps us do conservation projects on the land. So they help us manage our 40 some acres of woods and help us everything from like removing invasive species, installing pollinator plants in our hedgerows and pollinator meadows to help compensate for the fact that climate change and habitat loss due to sprawl limit how many places there are for insects to eat and to breed and find shelter. And we, especially as organic farmers, but all farmers, rely on there being a diverse population of insects. So government cost share has been a huge benefit, allowing us to make those improvements, and things like putting down a cement pad so that we can make our compost not on mud, but on a nice firm surface. Also, that prevents runoff into the little river, which we don't want to pollute, but we need to be able to make compost. So programs like that are awesome, and support them in the Farm Bill.
Great.
Yeah, I would actually second what Daisy just said, which is, I mean, farmers need the government. And if you're a farmer, you are benefiting from a lot of, I'm just going to say it, socially democratic, and not politically democratic, but social democracy. The government should be involved in the business of making sure that agriculture is taken care of, both environmentally and financially, that, farms are stable, that they're environmentally stable, that, you've got a fairly, productive lifestyle for farmers. And NRCS does a lot of really good work. And I get really mad when people go on their, small government, anti-government tirades, and then maybe like, talk about, farming and so, and it's like, come on, man, like our agricultural system is big government. It's a big social program. Farmers are getting help from the government all over this country. And it's really important to sort of shout, the praise of a lot of the, there's some bad stuff going on, but NRCS, from my perspective and what I've had, my interactions with them have been fantastic, and making sure the public knows that is important.
Thanks, Mike. I knew about it with large farms, but it's interesting to hear you all talk about it with your smaller farms. Nomi, anything else? And you maybe have a double perspective here because you're also at the farmer's market, or you manage that.
Yeah. I guess I appreciate what Daisy and Mike were saying. And I think that's important for customers to know. And the other thing I was thinking about is that I feel like personally, like I like need the public to be talking and acting on the climate crisis more. And like, I think the bigger picture, of course, is that like there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and where that like lands home is, I feel like farming can be kind of like, we have this, we're really lucky in Waldo County to have an amazing community of farmers and like really great peer support. And it just by nature, I think in some ways can be kind of like a lonely endeavor. And like when we are out working in the weather every day and like witnessing the extreme weather and getting anxious about it, and the more that I hear like my customers or folks in the public like acknowledging it, the like less lonely that feels. So I just like want to put that out there, that feels really important to me.
Good. That's a great note, reminder for all of us. Okay, so we have a bunch of questions in the chat and we'll fire through a few of them quickly. So one is for you, Nomi. As a small scale farm, is your only income stream veggie sales at Belfast and Rockland farmers markets, or are you into some other value added products as well? And of course, you mentioned your beef herd.
Yeah. Yeah, 100% of our income comes from the farm at this point. When we did move up here, my partner James had an full-time off-farm job for the first 3 years, maybe, until we could get a good solid foundation, and until it became too challenging to run a business with one person and one person on the weekends and at night.
Yeah. So here's a question from Gerald Brand about how do you maximize yield with organic practice? Feed the soil, not the plant? This is the question. You're all talked about composting. There are some pretty significant composting operations on your farms. Any additional comment on that?
I'll just, if you guys don't mind, I'll chime in. Yeah, I mean, like, absolutely, you got to feed the soil, because you will get fantastic returns. And as an organic farmer, it has to be your mission to increase soil microbiology. It has to be your mission, to try and make your, fertility more sustainable. It's hard. Sometimes the economics are hard. I mean, with like annual vegetable production, it's pretty easy to just like buy bags of chicken manure based, fertilizer and just put it down heavy and get big, huge, beautiful heads of broccoli and, all of that. There's a lot of organic agriculture that primarily done that way. So on a farm, we are balancing, making long-term fertility inputs, bringing the pH to where we want it to be, bringing up organic matter levels to where we want them to be. And the organic matter level in our soil, that has a lot of benefits to it. And, yield and crop quality are one. Reduced disease and insect pressure is another. Now that's a little bit, of a nuanced and a topic that's mired in pseudoscience and what have you. But anecdotally, the soils that we have that have close to 10% organic matter, the disease and pest pressure is dramatically lowered. So, I think it's absolutely a real benefit of having really, really good soil fertility, long-term soil health. Yeah.
Great.
I
Daisy,
did that one too. Yeah.
do you want to say something? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just as far as like soil health, which of course is really tied to climate change, because the more organic matter we put in the soil, aka take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil long term, we can reverse climate change through that process to an extent. So I would say soil health is sort of three basic things that we need to do for that. One would be feeding the soil with compost to increase organic matter and diversify the microorganisms and macroorganisms that are living in the soil. The second thing is to keep the soil covered as much as possible. So ideally covered with something living in it, either a cover crop or the crop that you're going to sell. But if you can't have something alive, you want to have something dead, like wood chips or straw or any other kind of natural mulch that's going to degrade over time. But it is a physical protector of the soil, protector from the UV rays of the sun, protector from strong winds and rain, etc. And the third thing is to reduce disturbance. So if you imagine taking, a forest and putting it through a blender, that's kind of what happens if you take a rototiller through your garden. And the less we do that, the more complex and healthy the soil life can be. Things like, spaghetti strings of fungus moving through the soil profile. So we try to turn over the soil as little as possible, disrupt it as little as possible.
I was making notes for my own home garden, and I think that is a question. I'm sure that there's a bunch of, by just judging by the nature of the questions in the chat, I'm guessing that there are a bunch of people who have tuned into this event because they are gardeners and they're interested in learning something from you all that they can do at home. Do you have advice for home gardeners? Some of the things that you do that you think are especially applicable to helping backyard gardens be resilient against climate disruption, climate chaos? An obvious one being work on your carbon in your soil. And those are some great bits of advice you just gave, Daisy. Are there others?
I think tarping is something that I've learned in the last 7 years or so that works really well on small scale gardens. Any kind of black plastic covering, or it could be a lot of things, but basically instead of tilling your garden, say in the spring when you want to get it started, you can just cover it so that with like a thin black plastic works well, because it warms the soil, causes the seeds to germinate, the weed seeds that are there, and then they have no light to grow, so they die off. So, and also it's very attractive to the worms and beetles. Like the worms will come all the way up to the surface and really sort of till the soil for you, almost mix it and kill the weed seeds, and then you take the plastic off and voila, you plant right into that. You don't have to turn it over. You don't have to double dig.
I would just put in a plug too for increasing pollinator habitats and like host to beneficials in your yards. We definitely in drought years have noticed that the spaces we're irrigating, the pests really love, like whether it's insects or larger pests like deer, because like that's the luscious thing around. We've been increasing our pollinator lines around the fields and hoping to bring more beneficials in that way to kind of manage some of those pests before they cause too many problems. So something that home gardeners can do too.
So pollinators is another thing that's come up in the chat questions. What changes have you noticed in the pollinator populations? I've heard both of you, Daisy and Naomi, talk about increasing pollinator habitat to attract pollinators. Have you noticed changes in those populations? Mike, feel free to weigh in as well.
I mean, one of the things that we try to do on the farm is pretty much have a flowering cover crop somewhere on the farm. And when I'm going and mowing, for instance, you know, buckwheat, and I mean, to have someplace, another stand of buckwheat nearby, you know, or a perennial wildflower area, not just my, you know, quarter acre of zucchini and summer squash, you know, but something with a lot more flower, you know, a higher flower population density is really important, you know, because when you mow these cover crops with pollinators in them, I mean, it's absolutely a madhouse of insects. And you're just like evicting everybody, you know. It's something that I've like, you know, personally, I like to see myself do, is to try and, you know, have a place for all that stuff to go. You know, the reality is that I'm, you know, am mowing these cover crops, and I've got to, on a timely manner. But, you know, trying to keep that habitat going is something we try to do.
Yeah. Daisy, you've got a lot of fruit. We think about bees and fruit as tightly coupled. Have you noticed the natural bee population dropping and you've had to do more yourself?
I haven't myself, but that's most because I haven't had time to, you know, be an entomologist. I would love to have somebody like doing annual studies. It'd be really cool. But so I have to rely on, you know, regional data that's coming from, you know, government's funded research at universities to tell me kind of what's going on out there. That said, there are times when, you know, if it's say cloudy and rainy during pollinating time for apples, it is possible to miss the window for pollination and have a serious hit on your yield. So if you don't have enough sunny, warm days, bees, kept bees, European bees that we use for honey are, they're the most picky about the weather, actually. So, and we do host some bees for Sparkies the last few years, which is nice, right next to our orchard. But they're not what you want to rely on in bad weather. So that's where that native bee pollination is really key. They're actually tougher about yucky weather. They'll go out and work anyway. A lot of the things that pollinate are not things that you notice easily because they're tiny. There are a lot of little tiny flies, little tiny, you know, parasitoid wasps and cool little things that I don't I don't know what they are. I just know them by very broad categories, and I get excited when I see them pollinating. But
yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of your answer about, or your thought about looking to Nova Scotia for plants that might be more resistant or resilient in the face of a more chaotic climate. Are there bee species that are raised in Nova Scotia that we don't necessarily have here that we could look to?
A good question. I mean, I know the one bee that people try to promote in orchards is the blue orchard bee, if I'm getting that right. And the way people tend to try to promote them is actually housing. So they need places to forage, and they need, you know, flowers from the early season, things like maple trees and early blooming willows and things to, you know, forage at the beginning, and, you know, then your late asters and your goldenrod at the end of the season, et cetera. But they also need the right diameter of holes in dead wood. So leaving up dead trees is, if it's not, you know, about to fall on your house, is a great thing to do for birds and insects as well. And if you've got a small place and you're really trying to promote the specific species, you can buy materials for a house, or you can take a piece of wood and get a drill bit of the right diameter and make holes for them to nest in. And if you have, enough intact habitat around you, which we generally do in Belfast, they'll come, which is really fun.
Yeah, it's very, it's a good note of hope that there's so much growing in your cover crops, Mike, and that there are so many bugs around. It's great. Okay, so we have a question from the chat. Given the importance of agriculture to Maine now and in the past, what role does generational knowledge and or collaboration between farmers in Maine play in developing resilience and adaptation strategies? Naomi, you talked about a really strong peer network of farmers in Waldo County. Maybe that comes into play here as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think there's a lot of generational knowledge and wisdom being passed on, and things feel like they are changing pretty quickly, and there's a lot of new circumstances that we're all trying to figure out how to navigate. And so I think it feels to me like there's a lot of just like thinking on your toes and sharing with your peers new ideas of how to work with the conditions that we have. And so, yeah, I guess I would say also, I think a lot of the ways that I gather farming information and knowledge from peers is through like podcasts, if I'm out working in the field with earbuds in. And I've really appreciated in the past couple of years, it seems like there's a lot more space in the farming world, platforms being given to people with Indigenous knowledge or Black Americans who have knowledge from their ancestors that's come over from Africa. And I think all of that information is super important in building resilience. And I'm really glad that it's being shared more in the world and there's more space for it.
Yeah, it's not just species richness, it's cultural richness that might help us weather these times. How about you, Daisy and Mike? Anything else about where you get your knowledge, generational knowledge sharing?
So the MOFGA's Journey Person program has a mentorship program, and I think that can be great for finding folks who are established to help give you some information. I think it's actually something that I could use more of, to be honest. Also, ideally, I'd love to have, somebody who knew the piece of land before I moved to it to tell me, where's the wet spot, where's the dry spot, what happens in weird years, and that would have been great. But again, I think that the internet is a beautiful thing, and you're trying to connect with a thinly spread group like small organic farmers can be. It's nice to be able to watch webinars and listen to podcasts and be on a listserv of other farmers who are doing the same thing and have the same kind of questions or doing something totally different. Something I would like to do as a goal is to connect more with farms in other countries that are doing just something totally, organic would be great, but something totally in a different climate, because I think that getting information from far away can be really helpful, especially places that have seen a lot of huge impacts of storms, etc.
Yeah. Mike, any thoughts on this, where you get your information? And I was curious too to ask you all where you get your weather data. And I love that you're looking for historical data about your land. Of course, that makes sense. But are there technologies that you're turning to help augment or complement what you're hearing from peers or what you know yourselves?
We primarily, the universities and their extensions right now is where I'm getting a lot of information. One of the things that I'm like that I really miss are the conferences. I used to really love face-to-face time with other farmers, with older farmers, people who've been doing it for a while. You get that injection of wisdom and you're sort of like feel less Sisyphusian, you know, like you're just, you know, pushing a stone up a hill. I'm hoping that, you know, now that we're all getting COVID, the pandemic's going to be over, we're going to get back to that in-person conferencing. But the universities, you know, the agricultural research universities, there's no question, you know, it's just incredible amount of information out there. I get information from UMass and UMaine and University of Vermont Cooperative Extension are the primary ones that I look to. And with weather data, NOAA and Weather Underground are the two that I go to, like on the daily, probably more like the hourly, checking my weather apps. And then we have 12 temperature and humidity monitors on the farm. Now that's not really like telling me much about, you know, climate and weather tracking so much as real time, what's the temperature in the greenhouse, you know, are things operating appropriately? But it is very interesting that you can see, you know, how temperatures develop on your land and in these different locations, and how, you know, the weather affects temperatures, especially with high tunnels, you know, stuff like that. But that's NOAA and Weather Underground are the two that I go to. I'm not super great at like going and digging up old weather records and things like that. That's definitely something I hear a lot of information about at conferences, you know, from a lot of the researchers who are really paying attention to this stuff. And I sort of wait for that to kind of inform me and check where I'm at, you know, where my intuition is at.
Wow, you all are such great examples of systems thinkers, and you're shining a light on another system that's been disrupted by COVID. And I hadn't thought about that information sharing, that the cost of the information that we don't get to share with each other, just as climate is changing more rapidly or getting more disrupted. That's another profound influence of this pandemic. Yeah. Okay. So somebody in the audience would like Mike to hear more about your, oh, Daisy, go ahead.
Sorry. Just
Yeah,
about the weather thing. I put one link in the chat.
Oh, great.
But there are more weather apps for farmers, or weather programs for farmers being developed, which have been helpful, because one of the things that you don't get from Wonderground, though I do look at that every day, is sort of the history of what has happened already. And especially with things like irrigation decisions, knowing how much rain you got is important. And well, I bet we all, you know, have our own rain gauges and keep our own track, but having a broader, having it automated would save a huge amount of labor. And this last year, I was part of a group through the university, organized by the University of Maine, called Climate Adaptation Fellowship. And it was for agriculture, for farmers, and for extension agents and other farm educators. And we were exposed to several new kinds of climate, sort of weather tracking data, and ways that are easy to access historical weather data. So things like when do I actually get frosts going back 10 years, 30 years? How is it changing? What direction is this going? And that was valuable. I don't have those links, but any farmers who are interested in getting into a community of people who are making adaptations to climate change. So adaptations meaning dealing with the climate change as opposed to trying to fix the climate change in this case, though a lot of practices tend to do both. I recommend it.
And the name of that program again?
Climate Adaptation Fellowship, and Dr. Rachel Chapman is the contact person at the University of Maine.
Great.
I'll try to put her contact in there. Website.
So Mike, while Daisy's doing that, someone wants to know about how your wood boiler is doing.
It's good. It's let's see, it's about 100, the water's about 165 degrees right now, and cranking through the radiant slab in the greenhouse. You know, it's a wood boiler. It's very efficient. But we're, you know, burning a lot of wood, you know, heating a greenhouse. But it's nice, and it's nice to finally be sort of reaping the benefits of a project that, you know, so much of my time and money this summer. Yeah.
Yeah, and you talked about the extra work that has created for your team over the winter, just keeping that boiler going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will say it's pretty minimal. We basically have a fire in the morning, and then we have a fire in the late afternoon, evening. The boiler itself has got a 2,000-gallon water jacket that surrounds the firebox, and it's a gasification boiler, so it's very efficient at heat exchange, and has a huge amount of insulated thermal mass. So your heat is really efficiently being transferred from that burning wood into that greenhouse slab or that unit heater, you know, blowing, you know, hot air, whatever you're doing. So it's really not that bad. We're not just like feeding a moldering fire all day,
Right.
night. It's like a batch style unit.
Okay.
But it still consumes a lot of wood. We're burning about 2 cords of wood a month to heat a greenhouse.
Yeah. So that makes me wonder, one of the things that people who are looking for ways out of this climate fix that we're in point to is human ingenuity and our ability to develop new technology to get ourselves out of the fix. You've mentioned, a number of you have mentioned different technology that you have that's built, that's contributed to your farm's resilience, whether it's better historical weather and frost data, or a more efficient boiler, or even these long tunnels that you have, Dixie, Nomi. But all of those are in some way new technology, or technology being used to support farming. Are there other technologies that you see on the horizon, or other challenges that you face that you think are ripe for a technological solution, knowing full well that it's not quite so simple? But are there things that are out there that are giving you hope or you're excited about?
Ocean farming.
Say more.
Have you guys done one of these with ocean farmers, like kelp farmers, mussel?
We haven't yet. I'm familiar. I have a day job working at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, so I know a little bit about it, but I'm really curious to hear more about what you as a land farmer are seeing in the ocean farming.
Well,
space.
I have a friend who raises oysters down east in Sullivan, and I've just like kind of gotten like really excited about ocean farming and like its climate impact, positive climate impacts that it could have, you know, especially with carbon sequestration. You know, it just fascinates me, and I just think we should be doing everything we possibly can to like get some more of that going on. Like, you know, I found myself a couple of times like, you know, almost like taking a step towards like trying to get a lease from the state and buying myself a work skiff. You know, I got to stop, but the really interesting stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, anyway.
We've had that same fantasy, Mike.
Mm.
Now I just fantasize about being able to buy a ton of kelp or something for our compost piles.
And for your cows to reduce the methane,
For
right?
Our cows do eat seaweed.
Oh, they do.
We do feed them kelp, mostly as mineral supplement, but I do know it can have some positive impacts on their belching. But yeah, the thing that I thought of, this isn't in the category of hopeful, but you were talking about technologies, and because we've been talking about high tunnels and also the NRCS support and funding, I think there's just so many high tunnels around the state of Maine, and it seems like the conversation that's bubbling up amongst farmers now is like, oh shoot, now we all need to buy shade cloth, because like growing under high tunnels is sweet a lot of the time, and when it gets so hot, crops just don't, even heat loving crops like tomatoes do not love that extreme heat and do really poorly. So I think we're realizing like just like extra management required, or like adding electricity and adding more fans and venting and all of that.
Yeah. Daisy?
Sure. It's less about technology, but a thing that gives me hope is a book I read. Oh shoot. Gabe Brown is the author, and I'll look up the title. But basically,
We should call on Brenda, our librarian, to help you with this
okay,
one.
Gabe Brown, about dirt. It's always something about dirt. The books I read, but in any case, some of the, I think what we do is super important on small farms and on produce farms, but also some of the, the vast majority of good soil in America is managed by large scale farms, and we need that soil to produce food in the future. I think it's only going to get harder to produce food going forward, and thank you, Dirt to Soil. It's only going to get harder, and we've already lost, feet of the soil we have in the breadbasket of America. And in order for us to go forward to success and have food to eat, we need farmers who are growing wheat and corn and soy and cattle to use conservation agriculture practices. They don't have to get certified organic, in my opinion, but they do need to do those basic things we talked about in gardens, like feeding the soil. Maybe that's cover crops, maybe that's rotation, maybe that's using cattle on places where you also grow other crops. They need to keep the soil covered and not be leaving, the middle of our country open tilled dirt all winter long. And we need more no-till farming. Ideally, no-till farming with less pesticides would be a great way to go. But I love reading that book because it's by a farmer who manages a huge amount of acreage and makes money using conservation principles to farm. So, and not because he's getting a premium on his product, but because those practices are productive. And they're definitely productive long term. So
yeah, I'll just put in one thing about the agronomic row crop farming that Daisy's talking about in the Midwest and other parts of the country and the world, growing grains. There's a lot of farmers who are growing what they would call no-till, but there's a big difference between the system that they're using, which they're referencing mostly their equipment, growing no-till in that regard, to really growing in a biological way. And that requires the cover cropping, the living matter that isn't just your cash crop being grown in that soil. And that's what a lot of farmers aren't doing. There's a big interest in it. There's definitely a groundswell of row crop farmers that are getting into this, but this is just for clarification, because a lot of times, conventional farmers will say, well, we grow no-till, but they're really not doing the things that a lot of us are talking about, which is mostly this cover cropping. Their no-till system means that they're not plowing and they're not disking and chisel plowing and all this stuff. They're no-tilling after they've sprayed a bunch of Roundup, glyphosate to kill anything that's there, and then just drilling corn into a dead seed bed. There's a big difference, and I just wanted to point that.
Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that. Speaking of of the breadbasket, and there was a question earlier from Lorelei Simino who was wondering, does Maine have any shot, or how independent might Maine be food-wise in the eventuality of a breadbasket failure? Like, could Maine actually feed itself with the land that we have available?
I have no idea. I haven't.
Yeah, that's
imagine not.
It'd be pretty hard. We could do a lot more than we're doing now, a whole lot more, but that would be a massive change in both what we eat and what we pay for it, and a lot of other things. Where we get food. What's that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think.
Okay. But yeah, I remember a few years back, seeing a talk by the former head of the Maine Farmland Trust, where he talks about sort of the, I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, but where they talk about sort of what factors are in play. Things like cutting down forests that are growing on prime soils that are relatively flat, and turning that into farmland. Part of that would be a necessary step in getting towards that, if that's the goal, is for Maine to feed itself. So that's obviously a climate, trade-off. Climate is all about trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
You want to protect your crops from the climate. Well, you've got to use plastic to do that. And guess where plastic comes from? Oil. So there are a lot of trade-offs, but there's no free lunch in the world. And but on the other hand, we do need to eat. So I think I'd like to see a lot more agriculture happening in Maine. We have a lot of fallow farmland. It's just, people just basically mowing 20 or 40 acres of lawn, and we can grow a lot more food. And I think we will, because food's going to become more valuable. Right now, you have to be basically a genius and a really hard worker to make a working class income as a farmer in the Northeast. And I think as a positive thing for the farmers, I think that's going to change over time, because I think food is going to get a lot more expensive, and Americans are going to have to spend a lot more of their income on a percentage basis on food. We currently spend, I think, the least in the world as a percentage of income on our food, and the least of all time historically on our food, if that's still accurate. So I think we can go back, but again, that's obviously a huge food security problem for all the people who are struggling to eat already. So we're going to have to figure out as a society how to keep people fed while also paying more for food.
Right. But if we ate better, maybe we wouldn't spend so much on medicine.
Yep,
but that's maybe that's a topic for a different night.
It's true. And I think we would eat a much more healthy diet on average if we were eating all locally, but we'd also be eating a lot of winter squash.
Yeah, sure. So in the spirit of supporting peer-to-peer knowledge sharing, I'd love to open it up to give you a chance to ask each other questions if you have any before we wrap up in the next few minutes.
Here's a question. Do you guys have enough irrigation water?
No.
Me neither.
Yeah, water's, a huge issue. I mean, I'm old enough, I'm not very old, but I am definitely old enough to have learned how to farm and started farming in a time that there was more consistent natural rain. It's just, I've had to adapt. I think I was pretty stubborn for about 3 years, sort of being like, oh, it's just we're just on a streak, where we're getting streaky weather, and I'm, was not changing anything and not investing in irrigation systems. And those stubborn days are over.
Yeah, we just drilled a new well this summer.
How'd it go?
Right before all the rainfall came. Still appreciated the rain, but we felt pretty ready to irrigate, and even unplugged our dryer so we could plug in our new well pump, because our panel was pretty full and not exactly the right choice. Had some pretty damp clothes all summer. But yeah, I do feel drilling a second well was a huge investment, and is like a huge step towards building resilience for our farm. And I think one of the folks in the audience was asking about organic crop yield, and yeah, water is something for us in drought years that it's just like, yeah, access to water is huge for crop yield and really important. So we've been, pouring some energy into that. And also, the more organic matter in the soil, the better it holds the moisture. So that's helpful too. I'm curious, related to climate, if you all have, how you're feeling about the insurance that you have on farm infrastructure or crops, or don't have maybe.
I only have infrastructure on equipment.
Mhm,
I don't do crop insurance.
mhm.
What about high tunnels? Have you been able to insure high tunnels? Yeah, I think that feels like a big, like, we probably have like $60,000 of high tunnel infrastructure out there that could blow away in one storm, and
Mhm.
it's uninsurable.
Yeah,
And kind of the cornerstone of our business.
yeah.
So yeah, that seems like
Huh,
something that maybe the general community doesn't know about.
certainly. Are organizations like MOFGA forming collaborations or collaboratives where you could self-insure in a community level? Has that been explored? Because it sounds like a really important issue to figure out.
Yeah, I don't know if it's been explored. I have not.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I can't see any insurance company ever getting into insuring high tunnels, but I really like the idea of sort of a community insurance. It's sort of like riffing on the Amish. They have a social insurance. When a barn burns down, an Amish farmer knows that his community is going to come together.
Yeah.
Get the lumber sawed, to get the barn rebuilt. It's an interesting idea with high tunnels, like, our own community high tunnel insurance. Brought to you by
Yeah, or state, yeah, that or state subsidized in some way. Yeah.
Mm.
That's thanks for bringing that up, Naomi. I had no idea. Yeah, interesting. What else are you asking each other? This is actually really interesting. Questions?
Well, I was going to ask Daisy about some of those raspberry varieties.
Oh yeah, Tula Magic and
Yeah.
Boom.
Not so magic.
Not so magic Tula Magic. I'm sure it's magic in the magic Pacific Northwest, but except for when it gets a heat dome. But yeah, so now we're all Nova Prelude, and I haven't replaced the late variety yet. See how it goes. Yeah, but and then we've done a lot of things to try to make a windbreak to try to reduce the desiccation, the drying out of the raspberry rows during the wintertime. And wind is just an incredible force.
Yeah.
Like the metal we have bent, and like the trash we have made by trying to use different materials to slow down the wind. I think if anyone else wants to try it, my next step would be heavy duty snow fencing. It's made for windy environment, but don't get with the cheap plastic. You'll just have to throw it away. Get the heavy plastic. But we tried various kinds of natural materials and just shredded and bent a lot of. Oh yeah, and U-posts. I will never buy U-posts again. They just bend, fold like Superman on Launder Day. But we did have reasonable luck with a big row of sunflowers, like a double row of giant sunflowers. but you have to be ready to like
Hmm.
plant that every year and make space for it and everything. But that was the grooviest solution. But if the wind comes from the other direction, then all bets are off.
You need some sort of new technology that's a wind power generating wall to act as a
Yeah.
windbreak and make
Mhm.
electricity.
Vertical.
Yeah, the
A nice line
verticals.
of those vertical, yeah, the vertical windmill is a nice line that I can install for the winter time and then take
Huh.
out
Yeah,
for the summertime so I can grow things there.
sure.
I like
So the
wind
engineers
powered.
in the audience, get on that idea. There's a future there. Wind is increasing and moving around. Any final questions, comments? You've got some suggestions of deer fence and 2 dogs. Yeah. Oh, so there's an example from B.D. Parker. One of the local CSAs had a collapsed greenhouse and the community helped raise money to help repair it. So maybe it happens in less formal ways, which is good to know. Good. Any other questions for each other? Brenda, do you want to ask a last question to take us out?
That's putting me on the spot, Sarah.
I'm
I do not have a
sorry.
question. I
I
do not. I
know,
just,
but
I
this
can
is-
thank you all so much. It's been very interesting. I give it, just by indication of all the comments in the chat, people have been really engaged, and I'm sure we could go on forever, but it's nearly 8 o'clock. So I think we should, call it a good panel discussion, and thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for moderating. And I did want to just mention and give a plug for, of course, for one more program that's happening next Tuesday, or not just one more, the next program next Tuesday, January 25th. The topic is called Maine's Climate Future, the Role of Carbon Management in Farms and Forests, with Dr. Ivan Fernandez from the Climate Change Institute at the University of Maine. So that's next Tuesday night at 6:30, and you can sign up for the Zoom link. If you can't do that, the YouTube will be available on our YouTube channel. He has some really interesting ideas. Some of you may already have followed him, but I'm looking forward to it. So I just wanted to let everybody know that. And with that, I say thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all. I
Thank
learned a
you.
lot.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for being here with us.